Welcome to another episode of American Scandal Report. I'm your host, Oz Dalton, and today we're diving deep into one of the most shocking betrayals in sports history, the 1919 Chicago Black Sox Scandal. This isn't just a story about baseball, it's a story about corruption, desperation, and how one moment in time changed America's pastime forever. Picture this, it's October 1919. The World Series is underway, and something is terribly, terribly wrong. Routine fly balls that should have been easy catches suddenly slipped through the fingers of players who had previously been nearly flawless. Easy grounders managed to evade gloves that were usually secure as a bank vault. The Chicago White Sox, a team that had functioned like a well coordinated machine throughout the entire season, suddenly appeared fragmented and utterly uninterested in winning. And the Cincinnati Reds? They seized every opportunity. Every single blunder by the White Sox was capitalized upon with surgical precision. Game by game, this formidable Chicago team began to falter in the most unexpected manner, handing the Reds what seemed like effortless victories. When the dust settled, Cincinnati had won the series 5 games to 3, a result that sent absolute shockwaves through the baseball world. But here's what made astute observers scratch their heads. It wasn't just the Reds' prowess that secured their championship, it was the inexplicably poor performance of the White Sox that contributed significantly to this stunning upset. Almost as soon as that final out was recorded, whispers began to emerge. Dark whispers. Fans couldn't believe what they'd witnessed. Sports writers who had covered the game for decades were baffled. Even players from competing teams couldn't help but notice these out-of-character errors from Chicago. How could a team so highly skilled completely unravel when it mattered most? These weren't just bad luck plays. These were the kinds of mistakes that made seasoned baseball men wonder if something far more sinister was at work. The murmurs of conspiracy grew increasingly insistent throughout the winter months, and by 1920, those whispers had swelled into firm accusations as investigations by sports writers and insiders began uncovering a grim truth behind the White Sox's collapse. By 1920, the pressure had become unbearable for some of the players involved. Eddie Cicotte, one of the most pivotal figures on the team and a pitcher who should have been celebrating a championship, instead found himself cracking under the weight of what he'd done. Cicotte confessed to his participation in the fix, and his admission opened the floodgates. But perhaps no confession was more controversial than that of Shoeless Joe Jackson, a name that still sparks heated debates in baseball circles today. Jackson admitted to accepting money from gamblers, though he maintained he continued playing to win throughout the series. And here's where the story gets truly fascinating. Jackson's performance during that World Series actually provided compelling evidence for his claim. Listen to these numbers. Jackson batted .375 during the series. He hit the series' only home run. He accumulated 12 hits, more than any other player on either team. If you were trying to lose a baseball series, would these be the statistics you'd produce? Despite this impressive showing on the field, Jackson's decision to accept $5,000 from the gamblers became the decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life. His involvement in the scandal, regardless of his on-field performance, had indelibly marred what should have been a Hall of Fame legacy. But the legal system and baseball's governing body would handle Jackson's fate very differently, setting up one of the most controversial decisions in sports history. To understand how this scandal came to be, we need to go back to the environment that created it. And that environment was largely shaped by one man, Charles Comiskey, the White Sox owner whose miserly ways would become legendary for all the wrong reasons. Picture Eddie Cicotte's situation. He had a clause in his contract for a bonus if he reached 30 wins that season. He was just 2 wins away from that milestone when Comiskey benched him, effectively denying him that extra pay. This wasn't just business. This was a calculated move to save money at the expense of his star pitcher. But Comiskey's penny pinching went far beyond contract manipulation. Even after the team's triumph in clinching the pennant, a moment that should have been cause for celebration, there were no rewards, no new uniforms, no recognition. Instead, players were forced to handle the laundering of their own gear, highlighting Comiskey's refusal to invest even the smallest amounts in team morale. These athletes, despite their success on the field, lived paycheck to paycheck in a state of financial insecurity that bred desperation. And where there's desperation, there are always predators ready to exploit it. Enter Chick Gandil, the White Sox first baseman, who decided to turn that desperation into opportunity. Dissatisfied with his modest salary and seeing his teammates' growing resentment, Gandil envisioned a way to obtain what he felt was rightfully theirs. His connections in the gambling underworld led him directly to Arnold Rothstein, a notorious figure who recognized the potential gold mine sitting right in front of him. Rothstein agreed to finance what would become one of the grandest betting frauds in sports history, promising the players a share of $100,000, a sum that would transform their financial realities overnight. Gandil knew he couldn't pull this off alone. He needed key players, men whose performance could single-handedly determine the outcome of games. His first recruit was Eddie Cicotte, still bitter from Comiskey's bonus betrayal. Cicotte's anger made him the perfect candidate. Next came the recruitment of other pivotal figures. Shoeless Joe Jackson, Swede Risberg, and Lefty Williams. Each was promised their share of that $100,000 payout. The plan was as simple as it was devastating: deliberately lose the series to the Cincinnati Reds, who were viewed as clear underdogs. The strategy was methodical. Cicotte and Williams, as pitchers, were tasked with throwing poorly executed games at crucial moments. Meanwhile, fielders like Jackson and Happy Felsch would botch routine plays that they could normally make in their sleep. This insidious plan would allow the gambling syndicate to place massive bets with virtually guaranteed outcomes. When the 1919 World Series began, the signs were immediately apparent to those who knew what to look for. Cicotte set the tone in the very first game by hitting the first batter, a subtle but unmistakable signal to gamblers that the fix was indeed underway. Throughout the series, the manipulation became increasingly obvious. Both Cicotte and Williams, ordinarily reliable pitchers who had carried the team all season, uncharacteristically faltered at the most critical moments. They allowed hits they should have prevented and gave up runs in situations where they typically dominated. The fielding errors were equally suspicious. Well-regarded players like Joe Jackson and Happy Felsch began mishandling catches and plays that would typically be routine for athletes of their caliber. The deliberate sabotage was fueling the illicit betting operations that had orchestrated and financed this betrayal of America's national pastime. What makes the Shoeless Joe Jackson case so fascinating is the perspective of those who were actually there. George Euler, a pitcher during that era, provided crucial insight into Jackson's character and involvement. Euler had played with Jackson when Joe was on the Cleveland team before his move to Chicago. According to Euler, Jackson was too naive. He used the word dumb to actively participate in such sophisticated criminal activities. Despite any conversations Jackson might have had about the fix, Euler insisted it didn't affect Jackson's actual conduct or performance, pointing to those impressive series statistics as evidence. Even more telling was the opinion of Happy Chandler, who served as baseball commissioner after Judge Landis. In interviews following his tenure, Chandler stated that he didn't believe Joe Jackson did anything wrong in connection with the scandal. He called Jackson's exclusion from the Hall of Fame an injustice that should be rectified by baseball authorities. But here's the tragic irony. Chandler never acted on this belief while he held the power to do so. Jackson's story is particularly heartbreaking when you consider his humble beginnings. He started playing baseball in Greenville, South Carolina at just 13 years old on a field beside Brandon Mill. Playing Mill team baseball offered financial incentives. Jackson could earn more in a single game than he did working 11 hours a day at the mill. This was his pursuit of the American dream, which ultimately became his nightmare. Rising from these modest beginnings to national fame, Jackson's legacy could have rivaled those of Ty Cobb and other legends of the dead ball era. Instead, circumstances took his career in an entirely different direction. In 1921, 8 players were tried on charges of conspiracy to defraud the public. Despite the confessions and mounting evidence pointing to their guilt, the jury delivered a shocking verdict: not guilty on all charges. The courtroom erupted in celebration, with defendants and their supporters cheering the acquittal. But their celebration would be short-lived. The players spent that night celebrating at a nearby restaurant until the early morning hours, believing they had escaped the consequences of their actions. However, when they woke up, they were met with news that would change everything. Baseball had a new sheriff in town, Judge Kenesaw Mountain Landis, the sport's first commissioner. Unlike the court system, Landis was unwavering in his resolve to purge baseball of corruption and restore public trust in the game. On August 3rd, 1921, Landis issued his historic ruling: lifetime bans from professional baseball for all 8 players involved. His position was unequivocal and revolutionary. He declared that regardless of court verdicts, any player who participated in manipulating game outcomes, Even those who merely engaged in discussions with gamblers about game fixing, without promptly reporting these meetings, would never participate in professional baseball again. Landis's reasoning was crystal clear. Conspirators who undermined the integrity of the game would never again set foot on a baseball field, regardless of their acquittal in court. To Landis, their guilt was undeniable, and they were permanently prohibited from the sport they had betrayed. Critics viewed this ruling as overly severe, particularly toward players who may have had marginal involvement, but few could argue against its effectiveness in sending a clear message about the consequences of corruption in baseball. Kenesaw Mountain Landis emerged as one of the few clear beneficiaries from this scandal. His election as Major League Baseball's first commissioner in November 1920 came with unanimous support from team owners and a 7-year contract worth $50,000 annually, a significant sum that reflected the gravity of his mission. For the American public, Landis symbolized righteousness itself. He embodied tough justice, unyielding discipline, and relentless integrity. Picture this man: snow-white hair, string ties, distinctive country accent, and a fiery demeanor that captivated conservative America. He was often compared to the legendary Roy Bean, serving as their formidable guardian against the modernization and urban chaos that threatened traditional values. Landis was paradoxical, vigorous and tenacious, yet inclined toward harsh judgments. His informal education combined with a short temper and surprisingly soft side painted him as both feared and respected. This complex personality contributed significantly to his perception as baseball's moral savior. The irony of Landis's role was profound. While he was a constant reminder of the Black Sox Scandal, he was also instrumental in suppressing its memory. His presence marked both a fresh start and a return to traditional values. He shaped his entire professional identity around cleansing baseball of this scandal stain and ensuring such disgrace never tainted the sport again. When spring training arrived in March 1921, with legal proceedings still ongoing, Landis made his first bold move by placing all accused athletes on an ineligible list. This decisive action demonstrated that he wielded authority independent of the judicial system. His declaration following the trial acquittal served as a stark reminder that he possessed extra legal powers to accomplish what the court system had failed to do. By permanently banning these players, he cemented their status as outcasts and reinforced the message that dishonesty would not be tolerated under his watch. The Black Sox scandal represents more than just 8 players making bad decisions. It exposed the deep-rooted gambling culture that had infected baseball for decades. This wasn't an isolated incident. It was the dramatic climax of years of corruption that had been festering beneath the surface of America's national pastime. What made this scandal so devastating was its clumsiness. The conspiracy unfolded in such an obvious manner that it became impossible to ignore or cover up. But in that failure lay baseball's salvation. The scandal served as a watershed moment that forced the sport to confront and eradicate the long-standing intertwining of game fixing and gambling that had become as much a fixture of baseball as the physical strategies of play itself. The players involved became scapegoats, not just for their own actions, but for generations of dishonest players and their enablers in executive offices and the media. Had this scandal surfaced less dramatically, baseball might never have been compelled to institute such thorough reforms. Without these changes, the sport risked devolving into a mere extension of gambling interests rather than remaining America's revered national pastime. The aftermath brought unprecedented clarity to the consequences of gambling in baseball. The infamous baseball rules 21A and 21D were prominently displayed in major league clubhouses, conveying unequivocal guidelines. Players or affiliated individuals knowingly involved in influencing game outcomes or betting on games face penalties ranging from suspension to permanent ineligibility. Even Charles Comiskey, despite his role in creating the conditions that led to the scandal through his miserly treatment of players, attempted to position himself as a reformer. However, this strategy backfired spectacularly, transforming him from a cherished baseball figure into a tarnished one in the public eye. The story of Buck Weaver serves as perhaps the most tragic lesson of the entire scandal. Despite never accepting bribes or purposefully underperforming, his unwillingness to inform on his teammates condemned him alongside the active conspirators. Weaver's fate demonstrates how association with scandal, even passive association, brought severe consequences in Landis's new baseball world. For Joe Jackson, the debate continues decades later. Was he justly penalized? Should his lifetime ban have prevailed despite his spectacular performance during the 1919 World Series? The critical fact remains that Jackson admitted to taking $5,000, which sealed his fate in Landis's eyes. Yet his superior on-field performance presents a paradox that historians still grapple with today. Many argue that Jackson may not have fully comprehended the extent of the scandal, making his permanent exclusion excessively punitive. Pleas for his posthumous induction into the Hall of Fame persist, with devoted fans continuing to advocate for his exoneration and the restoration of his legacy. However, Major League Baseball remains steadfast in its stance. Jackson, along with the 7 other players, remains permanently banned. Eddie Cicotte's role was particularly crucial in exposing the conspiracy. His confession to the grand jury on September 28, 1920 was pivotal in cementing the truth of the series fixing plot. Born in Detroit in 1884, Cicotte had emerged as a pitching ace for the White Sox, leading them to a pennant and world championship in 1917 with 28 wins. His 29 victories in 1919 made his involvement all the more shocking. Judge Landis's decision to ban all 8 players, regardless of their level of involvement, served multiple purposes. It established that no player was exempt from the newly established rules, including star players like Jackson, served notice that fame provided no protection from consequences. It also dealt decisively with the public scandal while protecting baseball's broader image and financial stability. The Black Sox Scandal stands as a monumental event representing a profound loss of innocence that has endured for over a century. The scandal's shadows blur the lines between guilt and innocence, leaving behind a persistent image of betrayal, not just of the sport, but of millions of fans who cherished baseball's integrity. However, these players were also victims, caught in a web of deceit spun by gamblers and unsupported by their team owner. As time has passed, sentiment has shifted, particularly toward players like Buck Weaver and Joe Jackson, suggesting that history's judgment may have been unkind or lacking full context. Despite exhaustive analysis of plays from the series, no explicit evidence has emerged identifying deliberate errors. Unusual gameplay and suspicious incidents were noted, but no concrete proof confirmed intentional acts. Most players maintain they performed to the best of their ability throughout the series. The scandal's notoriety arose from involving baseball's premier team and star players. The harsh consequences faced by even remarkable talents like Joe Jackson reinforced that no one was above the game's integrity. This sent a clear message that resonated throughout professional sports. Remarkably, baseball's financial viability remained strong despite the scandal. Ticket sales surged by approximately $500,000 in 1920, and during the 1921 trial period, attendance only experienced a slight dip. Babe Ruth's performance, highlighted by 59 home runs, signaled resilience and renewal for the sport. The Black Sox Scandal didn't merely mark an inflection point in baseball history. It heralded a new era of accountability where the sport's integrity took absolute precedence. The establishment of clear codes against misconduct created a framework that protected baseball's future and preserved its status as America's national pastime. Today in Greenville, South Carolina, you can visit the restored Shoeless Joe Jackson Memorial Park, built on the site where a 13-year-old boy first played the game that would make him famous and ultimately break his heart. A portion of Interstate 123 bears his name, and his statue stands as a testament to both his remarkable talent and the complex legacy of one of baseball's most controversial figures. The 1919 World Series forced baseball to confront its demons and emerge stronger. Without this painful reckoning, the sport might have become just another gambling enterprise. Instead, it maintained its position as America's beloved pastime, forever changed by 8 players who chose money over integrity and 1 commissioner who chose justice over mercy. The 1919 Black Sox Scandal showed how greed can rot even the most beloved game and how accountability can rebuild it. 8 players were banned, baseball's reputation cracked, and a new era of governance was born. The lesson still stands. Integrity matters more than money. Want to hear the untold conversations, the hush money ledgers, and the private moments that turned a World Series into a national scandal? We dig into original testimony, rare letters, and surprising witness accounts that will change how you see the affair. Download the Skoob app now to get access to the full episode, extended interviews, and a bonus segment exploring the scandal's ripple effects through modern baseball. Thanks for listening. Join us next time as we unravel another sports moment that changed everything.